Joining me now is Washington Congressman Adam Smith, Democratic ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. It's good to see you, my friend. Let's get into this. I'm curious what you make of potentially seeing a former president in handcuffs.
Well, look, it's a very difficult situation. I think your previous panel did an excellent job of explaining it. On the one hand, no one can be above the law. That's a central principle of any just society. And President Trump, has clearly pushed the boundaries of that. And in my opinion, he's clearly violated the law in a number of different instances. And therefore, it needs to be investigated and prosecuted. On the other hand, it's a deeply divisive thing to do. There is no doubt that it will ramp up the partisan divisions. We've seen, Speaker McCarthy tweeting about it, others diving into the fight. So it's a difficult thing to do, but the justice system has to apply to everybody or it doesn't work. So I think the prosecutors in this case, the Justice Department, they have to pursue it. And if the crime has been committed, they've got to file the charges, and then we have to, pursue the system as we would for anybody. And it certainly seems like there's a ton of evidence here that President Trump has violated the law in a number of different areas.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate a political and legal perspective. Let me look beyond that with you, because, Donald Trump's social media post called for protesters to take our nation back. What do you think he's asking his loyalists to do, and does that give you any concern?
Absolutely, it concerns me. I mean, we saw what happened on January 6th, and we've seen over and over again that President Trump is not opposed to fomenting violence to advance his personal goals. And also, you're talking about a mob mentality out here. President Trump's supporters, again, as we saw vividly on January 6th, you don't have to do much to get them to engage in acts of violence. And if President Trump whips that up and pushes them forward, it's a very dangerous situation that we're going to need to be prepared to deal with. I mean, I think law enforcement, all across the country, I believe President Trump is planning on making an appearance down in Texas early this week. We're going to have to be ready for it because we've seen this before on a number of occasions, and it is very dangerous for the country, without a doubt.
All right, let's head overseas now. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin, accusing him of war crimes. Tell me how significant this is, and what do you think the chances are that he will be held accountable?
Well, it's very significant. I don't know that there's a huge chance that he's ultimately going to be held accountable. I mean, we're not going to go into Russia and take him out and prosecute him. So I think it's going to be hard, but you still have to make the clear statement that war crimes have been committed. We've seen, he's kidnapping children from Ukraine, forcing them into Russia, taking them away from their families. They're intentionally targeting civilians. I mean, war crimes have been committed. I think it's incredibly significant, number one, that the International Criminal Court recognize that, call it what it is, and that the international community do so as well. But also, I think it's interesting as we move from one subject to the next, the rise of autocracy and a fascist approach to governing is a global problem. I mean, that's certainly the problem with the way Putin is running Russia, the way he thinks he can simply violate the sovereignty of Ukraine and absorb it into that autocratic vision. And Donald Trump, in the same way, thinks that, democracy isn't really necessary. He wants power. If democracy gives it to him, great. If it doesn't, he'll find another way to take it. And the links between, former President Trump, Putin, what's going on in Hungary, what's going on, sadly, to some degree with the Netanyahu government in Israel as they try to, take away judicial independence. There's this general drift in the country away from the basic norms of democracy and basically governments of laws, not of people. They're moving in that other direction, and that's what we see in President Trump's actions. It's what we've seen in Russia. It's what we've seen in a number of other places, and something that we need to push back against. And the United States should be a leader in the opposite approach, a leader for international rules-based systems, democracy, greater economic and political freedom, not might makes right, as Putin is trying to enforce upon the sovereign country of Ukraine.
Yeah, I do appreciate your perspective and naming all the other places that are having those issues. Let's talk about Chinese President Xi, who's traveling to Moscow for meetings with Putin next week. What do you, sir, make of the timing of that? What are you watching out for?
Yeah, what I'm really watching out for is if China's going to start helping Russia in the war in Ukraine. That would be a major line to cross for China. We need to do everything we can to, to bolster international support, to pressure China not to do that, to not further empower the war crimes and the autocratic actions of President Putin. So I think that's the real big worry here. I mean, look, China and Russia share one goal, and that is to weaken the United States and the West. Both want to be able to expand their power without checks, without any sort of balance against it. They see us as the primary threat. They have that in common. But China also, much more so than Russia, wants to do business with the world. They want to do business with Europe. Heck, they want to do business with us. And the rest of the world is very uncomfortable with supporting, Putin's, violation of sovereignty in Ukraine. So we have to, and I think Secretary Blinken, President Biden have been very effective at calling out the Chinese government on this, to make it clear that any support for Russia would subject China to some of those same sanctions and would violate international norms that, frankly, even China has claimed to support. So that's what's really on the line right now, as we look at how close Russia and China are going to be.
And those military drills are being held this weekend in the Gulf of Oman. That's definitely going to put all of that on display. They are being held along with Iran and their navies. Let me get to one more question with you, though, sir. With the Biden administration threatening a ban on TikTok in the United States if its Chinese owners refuse to sell their stakes in it. You have TikTok's chief executive who'll be testifying before Congress next week. But it all comes, sir, as we are also now learning that the DOJ and FBI are investigating the app, including previously disclosed allegations that the company's employees spied on journalists. What are the biggest questions that you think need to be answered relative to TikTok? I mean, what concerns you most, and do you think it should be banned?
Look, there's two things at play here. One is, the degree to which China could use this app to spy on and achieve, their aims at the expense of U.S. interests. And we've seen that certainly in the tracking of U.S. citizens and the tracking of journalists. We've seen it as China is wont to do. They also regulate these platforms so that only their propaganda message goes out. If you want to go on TikTok and talk about, the violation of human rights in Hong Kong, or against the Uyghurs, or to stand up, for Taiwan's right not to be invaded, they will silence that. Okay, they will control the narrative. So number one, what is China doing with this app to advance these interests that they have that are contrary to our interests, and we need to control that. But number two is the larger question of all these social media platforms, whether it's China or Meta or whoever, using our personal data in a way that violates individual rights and privacy rights, to manipulate us and move us in directions that frankly are not good for society. We've seen the impact all of this has had on our children. So we need to protect ourselves against China's illegal actions against us, but also we need to protect ourselves against the very nature of these social media platforms that violate our privacy and undermine our mental health and a whole bunch of other issues. I think we need to look seriously at banning TikTok if they don't get those practices under control. I mean, just forcing the sale may not be enough. We need to make sure that China does not have control of this type of interest so that they can jeopardize our national security. So yes, if they don't clean that up, I would absolutely support a ban.
Washington Congressman Adam Smith, thank you so much for your time on this important news day. Appreciate you.